Hey, what's going on, guys? My name is Justin Loria, and today we're going to be going over 6 tips to help you film better videos using just your cell phone. Alright, so for tip number 1, you're going to want to find a way to stabilize your phone while you're filming. If there's one thing, in my opinion, that can just absolutely ruin a video clip, it's shaky footage. So if you can avoid holding your phone like this while you're filming, you're already going to be making your video look a whole lot better. Now, if you have absolutely no other option other than to film handheld, there are a couple things you can do to make your footage a little bit less shaky. So instead of holding your phone with your arms fully outstretched like this, which is going to create all these little micro jitters that you can't really see when you're filming, but then when you watch the video back later, you're going to see it's a little shaky. Instead of doing that, take your elbows, tuck them into your sides, and then when you need to move the camera, move your whole body so you can like bend at your knees and rotate at your waist to kind of get that smooth motion rather than trying to micro adjust with your wrists and your fingers and stuff like that. Even better, if you can find a ledge or a table or something to rest your phone on while you're filming, I'd say go ahead and use that option instead, because anything that's attached to the ground is going to be a whole lot more stable than trying to hold the phone with your hands. Now, if you're just going to be filming yourself, one thing that can cause a little bit of a headache is trying to find a way to set up your phone so that you can see and interact with the screen while having the camera pointed in the right direction, all the while keeping it from falling over every time you touch it or when the wind blows. So one technique that I use when I'm out and about and I don't have my tripod on me or anything is I just try to find 2 heavy objects, like maybe 2 rocks, and I set them just close enough so that the phone can slide right in between them. Then I press record, put the phone in between it, and then from there it should be good to go and it won't be able to fall in either direction. However, a much better option in my opinion would be just getting one of these little cell phone holders and then a small flexible tripod like this. That way you can film from almost any angle you want as long as you have something to wrap the legs of the tripod around. So another cool option you have with a tripod like this is you can actually just bend the legs into the shape of a handle and then use it like that. So you can film upside down as well. And doing it like this is another really useful way to add a good amount of stabilization to your footage. If you film like this a lot, you can either buy or make a dedicated handle, but if you're only planning on doing this every once in a while, the flexible tripod option should work pretty well as a jack of all trades. Okay, so now on to my second tip, which is to choose the correct camera settings. A couple of variables you're going to want to consider when you're filming with your cell phone are going to be the focal length or the zoom level, the resolution, and the frame rate. Now regarding focal length, a lot of phones, including mine, only have one camera on the back, which means they only have one native focal length. And then what they allow you to do is they kind of fake having additional focal lengths by allowing you to digitally zoom in on your subject. But what ends up happening is you're not actually zooming in on the subject when you do that. You're just blowing up the video that you already have and cropping in on it. So if you do that a little bit too much, you're going to notice that your final video looks extremely pixelated and like low resolution. So I personally never recommend digitally zooming in on your subject. If you have a cell phone with just one camera and you want to make your subject look bigger, I'd say just find a way to move the phone closer to the subject. Now alternatively, if your phone has multiple cameras on it, you can instead choose your focal length based on your artistic vision of the shot or if the situation dictates the use of one over the other. So if you're filming yourself or if you're filming another person at close range, generally the wide angle is going to be a great option to start with. Wide angle shots let the viewer take in the entire scene. So if you want to make sure that you're capturing everything, especially if the filmer isn't able to constantly check the framing on the back of their phone, wide angle should do the trick pretty well. One little bonus that wide angle shots provide over the other focal lengths is that camera shake is the least apparent in that setting. Medium focal lengths are good if you want to focus your viewer's attention a little bit, especially if you can't be right next to the thing that you want to film. And then using your telephoto lens for tight shots can really add an artistic flair to your video by allowing you to show your audience only the exact thing that you want to highlight. But be careful not to have any camera shake and make sure that you practice your camera movements enough so that something amazing doesn't happen just outside of your frame. One cool combination that I really like to see in people's edits is if you film something first with a wide angle to capture the whole scene and then film it again with a really tight angle and focus on the most interesting part of the shot, maybe do that one in slow motion. Doing those two back to back can really get a viewer to understand fully what's going on and be able to focus in on the coolest part of the shot. Now as far as camera settings go, the next thing you're going to want to check is going to be your video resolution. So filming in the highest available resolution all the time might seem like the safest option, but storing, transferring, and working with 4K and sometimes even 8K footage really can turn into a huge nightmare once you start making a lot of videos, especially at higher frame rates. So when you're choosing your video resolution, first consider what platform your video is going to be viewed on eventually. So for social media channels where people are just going to be looking at your video on their phone, 720p or HD is going to be plenty of resolution. And if you're filming a video that's going to go on YouTube, 1080p or full HD is generally going to be more than enough, and it's going to save you a ton on your file sizes. Only film in 4K if you really think you're going to need all that resolution. Like if you think you might need to digitally zoom in on your footage later so that your subject is larger in the frame. If it helps, even on a TV or a computer monitor, most people cannot tell the difference between 1080p footage and 4K footage. Alright, so now finally regarding frame rate, I'd say just go ahead and film at whatever your phone's default setting for that is, unless you're filming something that needs to be in slow motion, in which case you can film at a higher frame rate, like maybe 60 frames per second, and then slow it down to half speed in post, but only slow down the part where the action is and leave the rest of it full speed. People can get sort of annoyed if you slow down more than you need to and they're watching a bunch of slow motion footage that they can understand just fine in full speed. Alright, so now let's move on to tip number 3, which is to consider your composition. In videography, composition refers to the way that you frame the elements of your scene onto the screen. So for instance, you might have a basic composition like this where your subject is right in the middle of the frame, or you could try something a little more artistic like this, where your subject is off to one side. So one thing a lot of people don't really consider until after they're done making their video is that you have to actively choose beforehand how you're going to orient your phone's camera based on the video's destination. So again, if we're talking about making a video for most social media platforms, filming in portrait mode is usually going to be ideal since people are going to be viewing that video on their phones in that exact orientation. But if you want a more professional look, landscape mode is going to be your best option. Now another choice you need to consider is how you're positioning your phone in relation to the ground. Filming from eye level is fine, but usually it makes for kind of a boring camera angle, so if you want to make things a little more dramatic, get down low and film from closer to the ground. Alright, so my last note on this topic is that if you're going to be filming something where your subject is moving forward in the video, you need to consider how they're going to be traveling through your frame. So it turns out that it's quite difficult for a viewer to track a subject's really fast motion from one side of the frame to the other, so if you're filming something like this, rather than positioning the camera perpendicular to the motion, instead place it on a diagonal and make sure you're filming from out in front of the subject rather than from behind so that you can see the subject's face. Tip number 4 is going to be to optimize your lighting conditions. Now if you're filming outside, it might seem a little odd to have to worry about lighting, but there's a few things you can do to really make your video come off in its best light. Now first off, if you're going to be filming during the day and you have the ability to wait until the weather is perfect for your video, the best, most optimal conditions that you're going to be looking for are going to be when it's cloudy outside. So the clouds take the harsh light from the sun and diffuse it into a nice soft light, and it normally provides an even exposure on your entire scene, which is exactly what you're looking for. In contrast, in a lighting situation like this where the sun has no cloud cover, the brightness levels between the shaded areas and the sunlit areas are going to be too dramatic for the camera to be able to see both of them perfectly at the same time. So if you're in a situation like that, what you want to do is set your camera's exposure so that whatever the subject matter that you're filming is the correct brightness, and then let everything else go either way too dark or way too bright. Just don't worry too much about it. Now if you're filming during the time of the day when the sun is lower in the sky, try to reposition yourself so that the light from the sun is shining on the part of the subject that you're filming, rather than having the sun be behind your subject and making the subject go completely in shadow. And lastly, if at all possible, I'd say try to avoid shooting during the nighttime. Without a lot of expensive lighting equipment, it's going to be hard to cast enough artificial light onto your subject to make up for the fact that you don't have the sun. So if you can, just try to plan your shoot so that you're filming before it goes down. Alright, so tip number 5 is going to be to film way more than you think you should. For most people, when they first start making videos, they have a tendency to try to start and stop their recording with how they think they want the final edit to look. But since you're not able to predict the future, what ends up happening is you're kind of waiting for the action to start, and then it starts, you press record, and then by the time the camera actually starts recording, the action has already started and you're missing not only the beginning of what happened, but a little bit of a buffer before that, so that your edit gives your viewer enough time to understand where they're at before the action starts taking place. So instead, as a best practice, what you should do is start your recording well before you think the action is going to take place. Record through the action and then wait a little bit of time after it's stopped before you push stop, and then you can go back later and trim the video exactly to where it'll make sense and feel like a nice edit. Alright, so now my sixth and final tip is that you should utilize camera movement when it makes sense to do so. Now this one is my favorite tip because a lot of people don't think about it, but if you utilize camera movement, it can add a whole lot more production value to your video. One of the most basic forms of camera movement you can use is just standing still, holding the camera up at eye level, and then panning to keep your subject in the frame. So yeah, that lets you see the action just fine, but it doesn't really make you feel like you're immersed in the scene at all. Instead of doing that, try bringing the camera closer to the ground and try a simple push-in while you're tracking your subject. Or even better, instead of panning to track your subject, you could just move your camera along with them and follow them that way. This is one of my favorite ways to film skateboarding in particular because it allows the skateboarder to sort of stay still in the frame, which makes it much easier for the viewer to understand how they're moving. In situations like this, again, it's going to be a lot easier if you have the right tools to allow you to hold your phone low enough and at the right angle. Another cool type of camera movement you might want to try would be to start out with the camera behind something in the foreground, and then just before the action starts, slowly move the camera to reveal the subject of the video. As simple as it is, it's not really something I see a lot of people doing, so it's a good way to make your video stand out from the rest. Alright guys, so that wraps up all the tips I have for you today. If you use any of these techniques, I'd love to see the results, so make sure and leave a comment below and let me know how I can watch your video. And remember, the best way to improve is just to practice a whole lot, so don't worry too much about implementing all these tips all at once. Just do a couple at a time, and soon they'll become second nature to you and you can add more on later. Anyways, I hope you guys have a great day, and remember, never stop improving. Unbelievable.